Hello, friends. I am Lyrian Gaylor-Baird, the mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today, friends and family that make up the New Deal. Our next guest speaker is from the edge of the continent, and if you don't know where Port Angeles, Washington is, it's about kind of up there. And if you can't visualize that, if you've ever seen the Twilight series, it was set in a town called Forks, which is a misty Pacific Northwest town 56 miles away from where he's from. And this area of the country is near the gorgeous Olympic National Park created by Congress. It is home to Port Angeles is home to the oldest Coast Guard station in the country. It was a WPA project during the New Deal. And the community economy has largely been timber-based. It's a logging and timber town. It had the world's largest sawmill in 1912. And like many timber towns in the Pacific Northwest, it saw some economic decline at the later part of the 20th century. So maybe that makes sense as to why when I first met Derek Kilmer, when we were in grad school together, he was working on a dissertation about how can you help economically disadvantaged communities. And he was looking at mining towns in the UK and comparing them with logging towns in the Pacific Northwest. And maybe then it wasn't a surprise to any of us when he came back to the States after grad school and put his knowledge to work for people. He got involved in state government and economic development and eventually ran for Congress, where he made his priorities economic development and helping workforce, small businesses and jobs, protecting natural resources like the forests and ocean waters he grew up near, and taking care of veterans and military service members like those who probably manned the Coast Guard station. He really has a view, like we heard Secretary Buttigieg speak of earlier, that government should make life better for people. It should make everyday life better. And his bipartisan emphasis has earned him quite the respect and high regard of his colleagues in Congress. He represents the 6th District and has for 12 years now. He's a 6-term congressman. He's been a real champion of bipartisan issues. So much so that as a part of his work with the Modernization Committee, one of the 100-plus recommendations that came out of that committee, 202 to be precise, 202 bipartisan recommendations for Congress. One of them was that you should let members of both parties actually sit side by side because House rules didn't allow for that. He is very focused on good governance, which is what this next session this afternoon is going to be all about. So we couldn't be luckier to have him here. Fun fact about his work in Congress: he took that knowledge from his dissertation about how to help economically distressed communities revitalize and created a pilot program, which he then helped write into the CHIPS and Science Act. And that CHIPS and Science Act provision had 6 implementation grants that went out. And one of the 6 was for his county back in Washington where he grew up. His work has been translated into real practice that is making a difference in the lives of friends and neighbors and family, people he knows and call Port Angeles home. Now, like Edward breaks Bella's heart in the Twilight series, Derek is breaking our hearts as he leaves the Congress. But like Twilight, which eventually does, I mean, I didn't watch all the movies, but it has a happy ending, I'm told. There is a happy ending here because Derek is leaving Congress to work at the Rockefeller Foundation. He has a new role as the senior vice president heading up the new U.S. program and policy team, where he will surely continue to make a difference, continue to bridge divides and bring people together. And as his mother said, she's just really relieved that he has a job. Welcome, Derek Kilmer.
My mom really is very relieved. When I told her I was leaving Congress, she goes, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "I'm not sure." She goes, "You're leaving a job without another job lined up?" said, Mom, I think I'm employable, but geez, holy crap. It's great to be with you. Can we give it up for Lyrian? Madam Mayor, thank you for your terrific leadership. I also am, I am the chairperson of the Helen Milby fan club. Thank you, Helen, for all that you do to populate the earth with pro-growth, innovative leaders, and for being a great friend. I was asked to speak for 10 minutes about making government work better. That makes this one of the easier speeches I've had to give. I will tell you the hardest speech I ever had to give was at South Colby Elementary School. I was their Veterans Day speaker, and the task was to speak for preschool through 5th grade for 20 minutes. And I walked into this gymnasium filled with kids, preschool through 5th grade, and I went up to one of the teachers that I knew, and I said, 20 minutes? I'm screwed. And she gave me the best advice I've ever had in my entire time in public service. She said, Derek, here's the deal. Say whatever it is you got to say it in whatever amount of time you got to say it in, but if you see the kids start to pick their noses, wrap it up. So I'm going to try to keep this short, but if you feel like I'm running a little long, you all know what to do, okay? I have so I was asked to speak about making government work better, and I was a McKinsey consultant for a while, so as a consequence, I don't go to the men's room without a strategic plan. And when we set up my congressional office, we wrote a strategic plan, and it focused on 2 things. One, creating more economic opportunity for more people in more places, which Lyrian just explained some of what that work has looked like. And second, make government work better for everyone. There's a lot of ways in which we do that, right? Every time we do casework for folks who are getting hosed by the VA, that's how we make government work better. Every time we do the important work of oversight, and you're going to hear from the folks from the Levin Center next, we do that work. But I want to actually just give, after 20 years of public service, 3 lessons that I have learned, maybe with some fun stories attached to them, and then I'm happy to take whatever questions you've got. So one, it actually takes work to focus on innovative problem solving. It actually takes to not on point scoring, but actually just working to solve problems. I chaired the New Dems, which is, and New Dems, that's the sort of ethos of the New Dems. I always said if the New Dems held a rally on the steps of the Capitol, it would be me yelling, what do we want? And everyone would yell, a comprehensive approach to job creation that includes infrastructure investment, workforce development, and a smarter approach to taxes and trade. And then I'd yell, when do we want it? And everyone would yell, we're willing to work in a collaborative way that brings people together. No one shows up at my rallies, but I'm working on it. But I share this with you because sometimes it's hard, right? Politics makes it hard to do innovative things when you're just trying to get stuff done for your constituents. I want to give the best, and one of my lessons learned is you can disagree with someone on 99 things, but if you can find the one thing, go do that. So, fun story. There was a guy I went to college with who I was talking to, and I said, how's it going? He goes, I'm working on some of the coolest professional work I've ever worked on. I said, tell me about it. He said, we're working with an asset building coalition to try to lift people out of poverty. And we've done this really interesting research. We're working with this economist at Harvard. And he found a few things. One, that asset poor people, by and large, don't have savings accounts. 2, that if they do, they're not making deposits into the savings accounts. And 3, that asset poor people disproportionately gamble and play the lottery. And he said, so this economist came up with this interesting idea called prize-linked savings. He said, what if you could take the excitement of gambling and playing the lottery and apply it to saving money? And the way it would work is every time you made a deposit, you would earn a chance, and the chance was for cash prizes. Your money would never be at risk, but rather a financial institution could use its marketing budget and offer cash prizes. Here's what they found. It dramatically influenced savings behavior. People were far more likely to open up an account, far more likely to make deposits into the account. The other thing they found was that it was illegal. So, not for any good reason, it's just policymakers and regulators never thought about anything like this. So I'm talking to this friend of mine from college, and I said, well, you know what's cool? I get to make laws now. Why don't we work on this? So we worked with a bunch of anti-poverty groups and with the Asset Building Coalition and with the financial institutions. But I was a freshman, not on the Financial Services Committee, and, oh, by the way, in the minority. So I was like, well, we got this really good idea, but I got to find a dance partner to work on. So we're going through the financial services roster, and I say to my team, I'm going to go talk to Tom Cotton about this. And my team said, Tom Cotton's very conservative. And I was like, yes, he is. But Tom Cotton had been a consultant for McKinsey, and I'd been a consultant for McKinsey. So I'm going to go talk to Tom Cotton. So I go up to Tom on the floor, and I'd completely nerd out. Like, I go through the whole thing, Harvard economist, and here's what the data show, and all this stuff. And when I finished my rap, what happens next can only be described as 10 seconds of Tom Cotton staring at me in silence. If anyone has ever stared at you in silence for 10 seconds, it is either the most romantic moment of your life or the most awkward moment of your life. And in this circumstance, it was both. But when Tom Cotton broke the 10 seconds of magic, he said, so what you're saying is you want to introduce legislation that would eliminate unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep financial institutions from offering innovative products that would make people more self-sufficient and less reliant on the government. And I said, sure. I mean, for me, it was about helping poor people save money, but for him it was about eliminating unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep people from being self-sufficient. I was like, okay. So it was a Kilmer-Cotton bill in the House. It was Elizabeth Warren and Jerry Moran in the Senate, passed the House, passed the Senate, signed by the president. Now there's thousands of people around the country who have these prize-linked savings accounts, most of whom had never had a savings account before. So I share that with you. Not for your applause, though, thank you. But because I think, part of the ethos of New Deal leaders and New Dem leaders is like, we just do the work, right? Like that's part of making government work better. Second lesson for me has been, if you want things to work differently, do things differently. So Lyrian mentioned I was asked to chair something called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, which makes us sound like we were the IT help desk. We were not. We were nicknamed the Fix Congress Committee, and our task was make Congress work better for the American people. About every 20 or 30 years or so, there's one of these committees. Mostly they do nothing. They pass nothing. They pass 0 recommendations. And in fact, when Speaker Pelosi called me and said, hey, would you run this committee? I was like, what have I done to offend you? Because mostly they have been an exercise in not getting things done. As a consequence, we decided to just sort of flip how Congress works on its head. So, the first thing that happens when you get a new committee is you get your funding. And Democrats take their half of the money. They hire people with a Democratic background who put on blue jerseys. Republicans take their half of the money. They hire people with a Republican background who put on red jerseys. And then we spend the rest of the time fighting with each other. So I call my Republican counterpart at the start of the work of this committee, a guy named Tom Graves, very conservative Republican. So conservative, by the way, that when he left Congress, his seat is now filled by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Very conservative. So I call up Tom and I said, got a crazy idea for you. What if we don't do what we always do? What if we just hire one staff? Some will be people who have a Democratic background. Some of them will be people with a Republican background. But they'll all put on jerseys that say, hey, let's fix Congress. And to his credit, he said, my leadership's going to hate that, but let's do it. If you watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you have too much time on your hands. But if you were to watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you would notice a few things. We didn't sit with Democrats on one side of a dais and Republicans on the other. We staggered our seating. Why? Well, because I don't know about you, like when a witness says something interesting, my genetic predisposition is to lean over to the person next to me and say, hey, that was kind of cool. What do you think about that? And in our committee, you leaned over to someone from a different party. We didn't even sit at a dais. We sat around a big round table so that we could look each other in the eye and actually have dialogue rather than debate. That was not cosmetic, right? There's a reason, as Lyrian mentioned. We passed 202 recommendations to make Congress work better, including one that's being implemented today. We had a whole series of hearings on culture within Congress. As you may have heard, it's broken. And so I called political scientists, I called organizational psychologists, I called marriage counselors, thought about calling an exorcist to figure out, like, how do you fix the broken culture in the institution? But the best answer I got was from a football coach. I called a football coach who took over a team that was like notoriously bad culture, and he turned it into winners. So I called up this coach. I said, what do you do when you got players on the team who are actively trying to sabotage the team? And he said, well, I cut them. I said, well, we don't really have that option. And he said, well, let me ask you something. He said, how do you do new player orientation? I said, it's funny, Congress does it entirely wrong. Like literally, you show up to orientation, they say, Democrats, you get on this bus, Republicans, you get on that bus. Most of the orientation process is designed to keep the two parties apart. So one of our 202 recommendations was stop doing that. And the coach said to me, he goes, I don't know much about Congress, but that seems like something you ought to stop doing. And so this was the first new class in Congress to go through a bipartisan orientation process, where they even had a hospitality room where Democrats and Republicans could hang out together, which I think matters. I think I'm at my 10-minute mark, but I'm going to tell you just a quick third story. My third lesson is, I think part of the way we get an understanding of where people are coming from is actually to show up where people are, to actually go to where people come from. That has been the case in the parts of my district that generally don't vote Democratic. That has been the case in terms of working with my colleagues. The Bipartisan Policy Center does something I think that's really cool, which is they invite Democrats to go to a Republican district and Republicans to go to a Democratic district. And, so I went to Arkansas and hung out with a guy named Steve Womack, who's a Republican. And we went to the University of Arkansas, and we went to the Walmart headquarters, and we did all sorts of interesting things. And then I brought him into my district, and I took him into the glorious national park that Lyrian spoke to. No signs, by the way, of vampires or werewolves there. But when I took him there, the Park Service did like a bang-up job of talking about the maintenance backlog in the park system. And we're driving back down the mountain, and Steve Womack says to me, man, Kilmer, all of a sudden you got me caring about the maintenance backlog in the Olympic National Park. We went and visited the Port of Tacoma, and the port did an amazing job of saying, this is how many containers come from Arkansas and end up at our port and go all over the world, and this is how many containers come into our port and end up in Arkansas. And at the end of it, we're driving away, and Steve says, man, all of a sudden I care about freight mobility in the Puget Sound region. What the hell, man? So I share that with you because that takes work, but I think it's part of how we make government work better, is finding, actually walking in the shoes of those who may think differently than we do and may have a different agenda than we do. So I'm told I should take some questions. I'm happy to hear what's on your minds. And then if you give me 60 seconds at the end, I'd like to just say something in closing, and then I'll introduce your next speaker. One question. I've stunned you into silence. Why am I leaving? I did 8 years in the state legislature and 12 in Congress. I don't know who asked the question, but yeah. And I kind of look at life in chapters, and if I'm going to have another chapter, it has to start eventually. So that was it. Yeah. There are a lot of people leaving Congress who are like, good riddance, I hate that place. I'm not one of them. I got a great team. I'm really proud of my team. And we've been doing good getting pucks into the net, but it felt like time to do the next thing. Oh, one more question. Hi.
Hi, Congressman Kilmer. Christine Reeves, Washington State. I want to just say on behalf of, I hope I can speak on behalf of folks in this room, that for new up-and-coming legislators like myself, it has been really refreshing to see a leader in Congress modeling bipartisanship in these very hyper-polarized times. I think not just let's clap for that. And I can obviously testify, Congressman Kilmer lives just next door in the district to where I serve and models this not just in D.C., but back home in Washington State. But I do want to say, I think, on behalf of us, there are the one positive that I like to highlight about Donald Trump getting elected in 2016 is that in 2018, we saw more women and more people of color not only run for office, but get elected to local and state government. And that is the next generation of members of Congress, governors, statewide elected officials. And so as we see that happen in these hyper-polarized times, I just want to first say thank you. Yeah. And secondly, I guess I want to ask, as you're thinking about your transition away from government, and you've got this really cool job coming up, what advice might you have for those of us that are wrestling with whether or not we stay in this work in these hyper-polarized times, and what piece of hope might you offer us to continue doing this work?
It's a great question, and thank you for your leadership and partnership over the years. It's funny, I just said I'm not leaving saying good riddance, and I'm not. And I have seen such extraordinary things in my district that give me hope. right? Some of which our team has been involved with, some of which they haven't. I gave bipartisanship examples, but, I grew up in this logging town that crashed when I was in high school. And one of the things that bummed me out when I was running in 2012, I went back home, and the dynamic between the timber industry and the environmental community really hadn't advanced in the 20 years since I graduated high school. It was still kind of the Hatfields and McCoys on opposite sides of the gymnasium, throwing flaming bags of dog poop at each other. And one of the things we decided to do was try to figure out how, as public servants, we can bridge some of the polarization that you just spoke to. So we actually did something, we formed something called the Olympic Forest Collaborative. And we got the environmental community and the timber industry folks at the same table trying to figure out how do we manage our forests in a way that makes more sense for environmental health and for the economic health of our communities. And I'm going to be honest with you, for the first 6 months, it was just an exercise in trying to keep people in the room. And then we actually did a field trip. We actually went out into the woods. And this is why I say, part of the way you get an understanding of where people are coming from is actually go where people come from. We actually went out in the woods, and the timber industry folks said, these are ways that we manage that we think actually make some sense. And we had some of the environmental folks say hey, we think if you did this, it might be better. And it was this very rich dialogue. Next meeting we had was in a conference room, not in the forest. And the meeting kicked off with one of the leaders of one of the environmental groups say, my board has taken a vote, and we've decided we want to help you guys cut some more trees. We just want to make sure it's done in a sustainable way. And in fact, we've decided to allocate some of the money that we would usually use for lawsuits, suing when there's a timber sale we disagree with it, instead use it to hire a forester to supplement the work of the Forest Service to help you guys harvest more timber. I almost fell out of my chair, right? And I share that with you because, and I have so many other examples like that, right? It can be overwhelming, right? I got invited to a YMCA in my district thinking they were going to talk to me about gymnasiums losing money during the pandemic. You know what they wanted to talk to me about? Fights breaking out at the Y over politics, over the shirt someone was wearing or the hat someone was wearing or the cable news channel someone was watching on the elliptical. There was a NBC News, there were 2 polls last year. I like to sleep when I can, but 2 polls literally caused me to lose sleep. One was an NBC News poll that said, do you agree or disagree with this statement? America is so divided, it is now incapable of solving big problems. 70% of respondents agreed with that statement. There was an appropriately titled Battleground poll that asked Americans on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being no conflict and 100 being civil war, where do you place the United States right now? And the median score was a 70. Meaning Americans thought we were more than 2/3 of the way to civil war. Now, you can say, okay, so what do you want to do with that information? Do you say, well, I guess that's just life in 2024, and we're all going to hate each other, and maybe we'll go to war with each other, and I got to worry when I get on the elliptical? Or do you say, I'm going to get in the game, right? And I'm going to do what I can. And for me, that's been for the last 20 years being in the game in the state legislature and in the Capitol, and now it'll be in the game in a different way, right? Being involved through philanthropy. But I think it is really important to be in the game. And that gives me hope. The Forest Collaborative gives me hope. The work of the YMCA, which actually hired a consultant that has trained their staff and trained their board in conflict resolution and now is hosting bridging efforts within their community to talk about tough issues in the community, like how do we build more affordable housing, bringing people from the Y together to problem solve. That gives me hope. But maybe that's a good way to end my remarks, which is, I like when we talk about this and when you ask me, why people should stay in it, we have agency, right? I used to say, I go to this terrifically progressive Methodist church in Gig Harbor, Washington, and I was given a quote by my pastor, and it said, it was from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and the background is every time I left the church, she'd say, how's it going back there? And I'd always say, well, I'm genetically optimistic. That was our rap, on my way out the door. She said, how's it going in DC? Well, I'm genetically optimistic. And she gave me this sheet of paper. She said, I want you to stop saying that. I got to my car, I unfolded the paper, and it was a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and it said, there is a difference between optimism and hope. It said, optimism is a passive virtue. It is the belief that things will get better. It said, hope is an active virtue. It is the belief that together we can make things better. is that it doesn't take courage to have optimism, but it does take courage to hope. And I like that because it presumes that it understands that we have a sense of agency. And I also like that it uses the word together because that's the only way we get things done. So in that regard, I want to commend you for being part of New Deal and commend you for being leaders in your communities and commend you for staying in the game. And I'm very excited to get to introduce your next speakers, Jim Townsend and Ben Ike, who are in the game. Elise, are you coming up too or no? Okay. When I did the work with the Modernization Committee, perhaps there was no organization that we relied on more than the Levin Center. Their work on trying to make government more effective, more efficient, on improving how oversight is done in not just the United States Capitol, but in states all over this country is second to none. Jim and Ben have both worked in the body. They understand the legislative process. They bring that knowledge to the work that they do, and I'm excited for you to get to hear from them about conducting effective oversight and how we can make our government more accountable. So thanks for having me.